to stop presenting. So, thank you for participating in the 2022 Partners in Action Annual Conference, and I hope you gained some valuable information presented here today. Please welcome our speakers from the BIA Office of Trust Services, Division of Energy and Mineral Development, Payton Batliner, who is the Branch Chief of Business Services, and Jeffrey Sanders, Financial Manager.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate it. So I'll share my screen here. We have a presentation to go through today. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us. I know we've had some presentations from our division and OTS in general over the course of this PIA webinar series. So we're happy to be back and talking about energy and mineral business development. So today we'll do a quick introduction of who we are at the Division of Energy and Mineral Development. We'll talk about our grants, the money we have available, and our technical assistance that we have available to tribes in the Midwest. We'll also talk about how we assist Indian country and specifically the Midwest region with energy and mineral resource development. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the Midwest regional highlights, specifically with some of the coal and natural gas power plant shutdowns that are forecasted throughout the next decade, some of the energy load forecasts coming out of MISO, and how tribes really can be a potential player in that marketplace, and how tribes should be thinking about engaging in this marketplace, because there's a lot of opportunity here for business development, economic development activities, and really providing more safe, resilient communities, right, from a power standpoint. After that, that'll be an intro with a little bit of business kind of tucked in there, but at the end of the presentation here, Jeff will be talking about portfolio development, how to think about financing these potential business operations, and really revenue and wealth growth. So he'll touch on strategy, portfolio planning, project finance considerations, and kind of do a deep dive into that. And then at the end of the presentation, we hope to get done in about 45 to 50 minutes. We should have 10 to 15 minutes for questions and discussion. So just a little bit more about me. I've been working within the division since 2009. As Mary said, I'm the branch chief of our business services branch. I work across all of our commodity groups, working with tribes in the business space, utility development space. I have an MBA with an emphasis in finance and entrepreneurship. I'm enrolled Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and I was born in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. And then Jeff, he is a contractor that works within our division here. He's a manager of finance, and as I said, he'll be presenting a little bit later, so I'll let him do a more formal introduction in just a little bit. So who we are, the Division of Energy and Mineral Development, our mission is really to provide tribes with the best possible technical and economic advice when tribes want to develop their energy and mineral assets. We don't come in with a pre-programmed game plan of you should do this. We really like to be a partner with the tribe and listen to what the tribe wants to do, how you want to develop your assets, in the methodology that you see fit. And we provide our expertise and grant funding to facilitate that. So we don't like to drive the process. We like to really be a partner in that process. So here's our org chart. In 2020, I know there's probably a lot of tribes who have worked with the Division of Energy and Mineral Development when we were just under the Office of Indian Energy and Economic Development, but now we are under Trust Services. And I believe Trust Services a couple weeks ago gave a great overview of all the diverse programming that's available to the tribes in this region. We are one of about 15 different divisions underneath the Office of Trust Services in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We are one of two that specializes in energy and mineral development, the other one being the Indian Energy Service Center. And I believe they have a number of talks that they're giving also. So, you have a wealth of resources that are available under Trust Services, and we really hope that you reach out and you access our programming, you work with us, and we are happy to provide those services in the Midwest. So a little bit deeper into our division specifically, we're made up of 6 different branches. On the left-hand side here, you can see these are our commodity branches, our renewable and distribution, our renewable and distributed generation branch. We have a fluid minerals branch. We have a solid minerals branch. We have a geotechnical and data services branch. So this right side here is kind of our service branches. And they provide, seismic data sets. And then we have a really interesting and cool GIS-oriented, map-oriented programming that's called NioGEMS. It's a software application, and it's available to tribes. And the NioGEMS team will actually come out, install the software, train people in how to use it. And it's really kind of a nice GIS-based system that tribes can use while developing energy and mineral assets. And then last but not least, my branch here is the business services branch, and we work across all of these different branches and commodity groups to assist with what is really in-depth strategic financial planning, business structure consultation, economic development planning and guidance. We don't take one project and look at it as a vacuum, as developing it in a vacuum rather. We look at it as a potential one project in a portfolio of projects. And Jeff will talk about exactly how we do that a little bit later. But that is a key service that we are now bringing out to Indian country is let's think about how we are going to develop these projects, create businesses around them, and not just create one isolated business. Look into these projects and see, hey, where is the value coming from? What else can we develop around some of these energy and mineral projects? And we look, not only within our office, but across the multitude of federal programs that are out there. And, there's so many new funding bills that are coming out with dollars available. And we see ourselves as an initial touch point for some of these energy and mineral related projects. And we like to assist tribes in going out and targeting other federal programs like DOE, USDA, EDA. I mean, they have had billions of dollars deployed in some of these recent funding bills that are available to Indian tribes for energy and mineral projects. So we just like to say, hey, come to us. Let's work together, be a partner in this development. Again, all of our services are free. All you have to do is come and formally request them from us. So, and then I also just want to touch on this last point here is that we have a marketing department also that can assist with branding and marketing services for the development of energy and mineral businesses, which is kind of a new service that we're offering. So not just my branch, but across all of our branches in DEMD, we have a whole suite of technical assistance and business advisory services that we can provide. On the technical assistance front, we can assist with in-house resource analysis, looking at solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, oil, gas, coal, sand, gravel, some of those aggregate resources. We have a whole in-house staff that is capable of doing some front-end work to get you ready for looking more in depth into these projects, maybe going after and accessing other grant funding or other federal programs. So we really like to target that programming there. Another thing that I'd like to highlight here is that we assist tribes a lot with due diligence and lease reviews. So, a lot of tribes have rights of ways and leases that are coming up for expiration. Please contact our office and talk to us about what your options are, not only for renewing, but maybe there's, it's a utility asset and you might want to take over some of the utility assets or be a little more engaged with your utility provider. So please contact our office and talk to us about what your options may be. So our grant, what dollars do we have available? Well, we have 2 grant programs that we make available annually to tribes. We have our EMDP program, which is on the left-hand side here. It's the bigger of our 2 programs. We award about $6.5 million annually. And that is, and I'll talk about these a little bit more in depth here in a second, but that program is to assess and evaluate and promote the development of energy and mineral resources. And I'll talk about what that means in just a second. Our grant programming has already gone out for this year. So the next time we're going to do a notice of funding announcement will be next year, probably spring, summer, sometime, I would think. This year we received 82 proposals for the EMDP program. It's a really competitive program. And you can see 82 proposals, $45.1 million requested from us this year. And generally we issue about 6.5. So extremely competitive program. And if you're interested in applying, please contact us early. Okay. The other program that we have available is the smaller of our two programs. It's the Tribal Energy and Development Capacity Program. The TEDC annually award about $1 to $1.6 million. This year we received 34 proposals requesting $7.8 million. And this is to develop the managerial and organizational capacity for energy and mineral development. What does that mean? I will talk about that later, specifically in regards to utility development, which is what a lot of tribes have been utilizing this program for. And it can be a really, really interesting program and assist tribes in energy development in a big way. So I'll touch on that in just a little bit. So both of our grant programs are no cost match programs. We fully fund, some of these projects. We don't, require a match. And then, so the EMDP, we can fund everything up until purchasing equipment. So that's kind of the major constraint of our programming, and why Jeff and I, we target, the strategic planning side of these energy projects, because we are really at the front end of these projects. So we do a lot of resource assessments with the EMDP, feasibility studies, engineering and design studies. What the goal really is to get to a point where the tribe can make an informed go, no go decision on a project, whether it be dedicating tribal dollars, to develop to actually go out and purchase equipment and develop that project, or to produce bankable documents that you can bring to a third-party financier. And Jeff will talk about more of those kind of constraints and how we view those in a little bit. The other program, like I said, is the TEDC program, and this is for developing the legal infrastructure and business infrastructure that you need to actually own, operate, and manage these energy and mineral projects. Again, the big kind of formation activity there is forming a tribal utility authority of some structure to hold, distribution, transmission, and generation assets for energy development. We can also fund other type of regulatory development, like leasing regulations, Hearth Act, uniform commercial codes, these secured transaction codes, and actually the business formation codes if tribes don't have those in place. Every state has LLC and corporations codes in place. Every tribe should have those in place too. So, and we can pay for some of those development activities. So again, we have a lot of staff in our office now. I think we have 55 plus contractors, 20 plus federal staff, 70 plus total staff available. So please contact us, take advantage of our services. We're akin to a medium-sized consulting firm of geologists, engineers, MBA like Jeff and I, that are willing to help. We like to provide technical assistance in a hands-on capacity and across the whole spectrum of project development. So, what does that mean? Well, that means initially, let's step in here. Let's make sure we have a really clear idea of what that trust asset resource is. What is its quantity and quality? Let's run a feasibility study around that, determining, hey, what are some of our equipment needs, CapEx, OpEx needs, that may fit into this project. Get to a really in-depth financial analysis, create, and then talk about what sort of business structures we can create around that project. We look at, marketing. We also do, like I said, financial, Jeff and I being MBAs and having finance backgrounds, really like to dive into spreadsheet analysis and financial analysis, pro forma development around these projects. So, please contact us. And then the goal is, if you cannot access a source of free capital or internal capital, what's available out there from a commercial lending or a federally backed loan guarantee that we can access to really, fund some of these projects. That front end, it's not these energy projects are highly capital intensive, is what I'm trying to say. So you need a lot of upfront money. And so accessing that can be difficult, for some of these projects. So we work with our BIA loan guarantee program, our DOE direct lending and loan guarantee programs. USDA has a whole suite of loans that are specifically targeted at rural development and utility development. SBA has a whole host of loans, and we really work with tribes to access that programming. We even contact commercial banks that you need to work with to access those programs. So we really like to be hands-on and move these projects forward. Another thing that we're working with tribes on is land management and consolidation of land, and working with tribes to identify potential new land that they can acquire. So where are we working? You can see our grant programs and technical assistance programs are nationwide, from Southern Florida up to Maine, all over, California, Oregon, Washington, and even we have a big presence in Alaska. So we are all over the place, and we do a lot of work in the Midwest region, obviously. So here's some of our recent TEDC programs. You can see we're all over the country with those programs also, working with Fond du Lac and Red Lake in the Midwest region, and we would love to work with more. Since our office has been issuing grants, back in 2006, I think is where kind of our programming as it stands now has been, was started. We've been working in the Midwest region for that entire time. So we have had relationships with tribes and have issued a lot of grant funding, have had a lot of projects in a wide range of commodities, from biomass, wind, natural gas, solar, microgrid, you name it, we've probably worked on it in the Midwest region. So the Midwest regional highlight, what is happening here in the energy space is that there are at least 32 planned power plant shutdown. Majority are coal-fired and natural gas fired power plants. This is the second highest of all the BIA regions. And load forecasts for the Midwest region do not show a decrease in demand in power. It shows an increase in demand. So, this provides a big opportunity for tribes. So what is MISO and the Energy Information Administration kind of projecting for what's going to be required in this region? Well, they're projecting that, with more than 27 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity to be retired in the next decade, there's going to be deployment of over 73 gigawatts of wind, 13 gigawatts of solar in this region. So that is a huge opportunity for tribes to get into the generation space. And how do tribes do that? Well, it starts with developing just basic capacity for energy development. And I love this graphic. It comes from MTERA, the Midwest Tribal Energy Resources Association. And it shows you, hey, on the left-hand side here, we have a passive tribe that, hey, you just pay your utility bill. Your facility managers, maybe they just pay their utility bill. You don't really read them. You don't really analyze them. You just pay it and you're good. You're done with it. Well, let's move beyond that. Let's move beyond just paying our utility bills. Let's be aware and understand, what are we being charged in our utility bills? Who are we paying our utility bills to? What are their costs and impacts? What are their considerations? And then let's get engaged and prioritize what are the tribal energy projects that we would like to see developed in the future, and then get active. Let's invest in some of these projects. And that comes with a lot of the services that Jeff and I can provide is, okay, who's going to own and manage these? Where is the capital going to come from? How are these projects going to be structured? Do you need outside capital? Can you internally fund these things? These are things that we'd like to get in and talk about with tribes, and then be very innovative and collaborate, right? I talked about some of our interagency collaboration, but I know a lot of tribes are collaborating amongst each other, talking about how they're operating utility and generation projects, right? So I know there's a lot of intertribal collaboration, and that's specifically where MTerra comes from, is this intertribal collaboration. So now, why focus on utility development? This is my utility development 101. Tribes, we've probably done 60 utility feasibility studies, and we see that tribes on average spend about $2 to $3 million per year on electric power. And that can run from a low of a couple $100,000, for a small pueblo in the Southwest, up to $20 million of annual energy expenditures and power purchases for a large casino resort tribe. So if you extrapolate this out, to all 570 plus federally recognized tribes, this is upwards of a $2 billion annual market. And all of that money is usually going to a third-party incumbent utility who may or may not have the tribe's best interest in mind. And I know, especially in the Midwest region, tribes are taking an active role in managing these assets, managing this extreme amount of money that is flowing off of out of Indian country effectively. And I know tribes are taking on more active roles and getting more engaged, and we are here to help facilitate that. So, as I talked before, energy projects are highly capital intensive, and there's ways to address that effectively, right? And build what we call the capital stack at the front end of some of these energy projects. And that comes with a lot of ownership consideration, right? Do you want it to be wholly tribal owned project? Are you comfortable with bringing outside investors or partners, not specifically non-tribal equity investors? And tax equity partners. So when we're talking about this energy space, there's a few grant programs and smaller federal, capital programs that will fund, projects up to like DOE's loan guarantee program, I think, or excuse me, DOE's tribal energy programs. They used to be $2 million. I believe they might be going to a $4 million cost match project. So you're looking at an $8 million total capital expense potentially, right? That can be funded underneath that program. What happens when you have a, 10, 20, 30, 40, $100 million project? Now you're looking at bringing outside investors, outside partnerships, and leveraging some of those tax equity considerations, investment tax credits. So I know tribes are taking a more active role in looking into how to structure these projects and how they can be engaged in this. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff and have him talk about, how we look at business development and portfolio development and strategy. So Jeff, take it away.
All right, thanks, Payton. Hello, everyone, and thank you for sitting in today. My name is Jeff Sanders, and I've been with DEMD for about 3 years now, and I come from industry. I've got a pretty long history in the energy sector, primarily focused on strategy and business development and project finance and those types of things. So I'm trying to bring that to bear on Indian country, and so far we've had a few successes. So I'm more than encouraged. Next slide. Go ahead and hit the next slide, Payton. So today I'm going to talk about essentially three things. Our services. I'm more or less here to introduce our strategic planning services. And then I'm also going to talk, by doing that, I'm going to talk about a few of the tools that we use in order to put together a portfolio of companies that we would like to engage with you on. And then a few comments on financing at the end of the presentation. So let me begin here. Payton mentioned go ahead and step back to that one. Thank you. The green box, Payton covered that to some degree. These are one company at a time type initiatives where we go through the business planning and advise on entity formation and deal structuring, and we evaluate the deal, and we do some financial modeling and then help you with project finance. So a number of you are familiar with that service. I think Payton mentioned something on the order of 30 plus tribes have worked with us to create a new entity or to purchase another existing business. But essentially that's been the typical service over a number of years. And as that has come to fruition, what we found is that, one good or success leads to another. And so that has led to us going down the road of staffing and creating resources and analytical tools to then address groups of projects. So the lower box there in green is individual projects or companies, and the upper box is getting at how we then look at them as a group. So rather than a one-off initiative, there's always derivative impacts that can be taken advantage of that we would like to then address in a comprehensive way, in a diversified way, in order to minimize the risk. And why do we care? Because if we do that, then that allows us to better access financing from banks and hopefully in time more venture related capital. Although in the interim, it does allow us, and this is from conversations across federal agencies, if we can show a better front end and how a collection of projects adds to the value that a tribe is seeking, then we can then engage other groups such as DOE to provide follow-on funds to what Payton mentioned above that we typically provide. Our grants are relatively small. These other agencies have much larger budgets and the ability to provide capital that allow you to purchase equipment and as well as write guarantees under much larger loans for development. All in all, both activities, one at a time or groups of them. The graphic over to the right gives you a sense of how industry looks at things. When you have a sense of measure of how volatile cash flows are, you can then assess the risk associated with a company or a portfolio of companies. And for a given level of risk, there is an expectation of a rate of return for that level of risk. And so if you turn to that graphic, it's essentially walking along the x-axis, move that depends on the cash flow volatility, and you move up to the curves that you see, and then over to the left to determine the rate of return. Well, that's how the market looks at things. I mean, and if your entity doesn't plot within that little bandwidth between the red and green lines, it's going to be tough to get financing. So we work with you to keep you in that range. And the truth be told, there's a lot of advantage that are afforded Indian country that are not available in other sectors. I come from industry, and it's like, boy, if I had some of those advantages, we could sort of run the table. So what it allows you to do is create new entities at a lower risk profile for the same rate of return, or take on higher risk the other direction and generate greater rates of return. So just one of the tools that I'll touch on again as we move through the presentation. Next slide. One of the reasons why this matters is because, as Payton mentioned, a lot of what we try to create for tribes as an entity, they're big cash flow generators if you can get them going. And those include power projects. You can see the solar, the wind, the hydro, cogen, et cetera, or fluid mineral projects. So hydrogen, enhanced oil recovery, helium, geothermal, those types of things, or mining, aggregate companies, limestone, rare earths, metals, and the like. So each of these, it's really those first three is where DEMD focuses its efforts, and all of which can throw off tremendous amounts of cash. We've had some success with that lately. However, again, they're capital intensive and they're going to require quite a bit of money to get moving, which requires some skill in navigating what is the financier taking on in terms of risk. So some of these tools are addressing that specifically, professionally, so that we can then walk with you hand in hand and talk through some of the economics around some of these ventures so that we can bring them to fruition. It's just a point of reference here. In total, so for the power sector, I was just reading the other day that the need for capital, just respect to Indian country with respect to putting together renewable energy opportunities is the need for capital is greater than 75 billion. Okay, that's all tribes, all opportunities. And if it was to be put into motion over the next decade, it would require that level of capital. Something similar to that number is true for mining, and something similar to that is certainly true for the fluid minerals. So you can see it's capital intensive, and it's well beyond the ability for even coordinated government funds to address. So you need to go down the road of putting together a company or groups of companies in a professional manner that helps the financier understand over time the risk profile and the improvement in credit worthiness as you build out these companies. One other point on this slide is that I'm sure many of you can see a path through a number of these different sort of sectors. We recently worked on one where it began as a hydro initiative that branched into additional opportunities, which included aggregate, which included the data center, and potentially some natural gas pipelines. Another had to do with, it began with an aggregate company that's leading toward solar development to support it, and potentially some geothermal opportunities for sustainable food development. So, again, that's part of what the portfolio construction is walking through the litany of opportunities, trying to figure out what to do, when to do it, so that we minimize the risk and maximize cash flow and job creation, all of which is underneath the core values of what the tribe is hoping to accomplish. Next slide. So that's part of how we go about our business. Again, we're focused on the high cash flow resources that can be developed, but we are specific in trying to make sure that the community leads. It's the tribe that defines the initial key metrics, whatever they may be. So we've run into the first one that I listed there, obviously least risk. In some instances, it's just a matter of like, how do we get to a good royalty stream off of these things and let someone else run it. In other cases, it's how do we run it from the get-go without the skills to run it. And so it's own and operate, in other words. And so we've gone down that road as well and helped put into place service contracts that allow the tribe to keep the majority of the operating profits from the enterprise that's created. So the tribe leads, they define the metrics, that begins the process, but DEMD also has key metrics that it follows regardless of the tribe. One of them, of course, has to do with the total project value, just traditional measure of like, does the project hold water? And there's three elements to that. Every project requires supplies that lead to its construction or development or coming to fruition. So that then creates the opportunity to say, should I take on some of those supply chain companies as well? So again, the portfolio approach. And then downstream, so the three elements are the supply chain, the project itself, and then the income that's generated from the project, both to the tribe and to the employees, which is spent. So where does it get spent? If you reference the prior table, you'll see there's a lot of economic development that can occur that is derived from these large cash flow projects, which includes sort of value-added activities like manufacturing or those types of things. So 3 dimensions, project has to deliver on all those. And again, we've created skill sets and analytical tools that help us evaluate, does this fit within a portfolio as a standalone project and deliver on all 3 aspects. Another key element that we strive to accomplish as we put those portfolios together is that sovereignty element, because they're high cash flow industries that we work in. Those things can lead to sovereign wealth funds over time that are substantial and allow the tribe to create a lot of that economic development without outside help. We have one of those in motion today where the forward handful of projects are fully self-funded. And so that helps in terms of what I'll touch upon later in terms of difficulty of financing some of these projects today. Lastly, there's a whole series of other metrics that we use. One of them, a number of them can be looked at in terms of a per capita basis. So you take whatever the metric is and divide it by the population. The value of that is that it allows you to benchmark against some pretty standard information that's out there. So let's touch on the next slide, if you wouldn't mind, Payton. What I'm talking about is that, so if you use GDP, gross domestic product, that a nation sort of generates in total, it's everything it produces, all the income associated with it, the elements of the project that I mentioned prior, all thrown together. You then have a profile of how a nation is doing. So tribal nations should view it the same way. And, DEMD interjects its activity into the totality of what a tribe is doing and contributes to that. And I'll go over that in a minute, some examples to the side there. But mainly the chart here helps you understand that, you can measure your progress over time relative to other nations using various metrics. And this one's interesting because you can see as of 2020, the United States, it's $20 trillion economy divided by 330 million people. You end up with something on the order of, on a per capita basis, about $63,000 per person. Canada's something on the order of 43,000 per person, and the UK 40. So 3 of the leading countries in the world, that's how it sits as of 2020. A couple of projects over to the left that we've recently worked on. So again, these are things that we helped with that contribute to the total pie that a tribe has put into motion as a portfolio. So the first one is the CO2 sequestration EOR project. It was a new venture that was formed that assumed the operations from an expired contract. It's currently producing on the order of 40 million a year. We're about a little over a year into it, generating 40 million in profits per year, which is part of that's price driven, but that should range between 20 million a year and 40 million a year, which for the 15,000 members on a per capita basis is about $2,600 per member. And that's value post royalty, post tribal tax. That's profits from the venture. So again, if you look at that and how that would plot as a standalone project against, a broader measure or benchmark of multiple nations, you can see that if we were to take into account all the things they're already doing, plus the project we helped add to that group of activities, they would start to plot well. Well, one that plots even better than that is the sand and gravel new venture. Use the second one example, where we helped the tribe through technical advisory only put together a sand and gravel business that essentially was making use of byproducts from construction. They happen to be fortunate. They sit on top of an alluvial fan, and every time they touch the rock, the question is, do we ship it away and dump it, or can we make a business out of this? They called us. We helped them turn it into a business. So now they're making money using rocks from some of the excavation that that they need to do anyway for construction. So that's one currently generating about, we helped them land a contract that now it will generate about 3.6 million per year. And they're only using a quarter of the capacity. So we expect that will hold up at around 3.6 million a year for 90 members. That's about 40,000 per year per member. So just again, it's just a way for us to help the tribes look at all that they do and stack it all up, and then have a comparative to a lot of metrics that are out there. Like any nation, the tribe can do that and see. So the 40,000 a year for that particular group is right in order with the United Kingdom. So I thought that was worth pointing out, but it's one of the metrics that we use when we construct the portfolios. Next slide. So now I'll touch on like 3 different tools that we use as we help tribes put a portfolio of multiple projects together. And that begins with making sure that the right stakeholders are informed and in charge. So largely, through project management, we work with an internal project manager, and we have a dedicated project manager on the DEMD side. So they're basically twins, and they work together, and we help make sure that all the right stakeholders are in place so that a project isn't stopped prematurely or has the right momentum as it begins. And that's what the graphic is about. It just shows there's different levels of how you inform the various parties. Some have a lot of influence, some have very little, some have a lot of interest, but some have none. But all are informed in a particular way so that we have a comprehensive view of, or at least dissemination of information to the right people. We've all run into the situation where not enough information flowed to the right people, and it just slows things down. So part of that external group includes banks is of particular interest to us, and that's part of that the work that we do. We're doing the risk assessment in part to inform bankers as we move along the total risk profile, the total credit worthiness of a tribe, if we have a chance to see all their activities. And like Payton mentioned prior, help them hopefully achieve a loan or equity investments that move it forward, such as a partnership. That's one tool. Next slide. One of the other tools that's pretty standard in industry that helps us is this life cycle concept. Every venture moves through kind of the 4 stages. It's a new idea, it's a concept. You probably have a lot of things in bucket 1 there, whole ton of them. And you saw the capital intensive industries we work in. So there's generally a handful of ideas, at least, that go into box 1, that some of them, depending on how that portfolio is put together, are timed out such that this is first, that's second. Kind of low cost, no cost usually leads from the gate, and then we go from there as you build a cash flow into self-funding other projects. So then it moves into stage 2. If it makes it past the concept stage, it gets funded, it grows, and high growth stage there, lots of need for money to make it or bring it to fruition. And then at stage 3 there is the venture is moving right along. It's now throwing off the cash flow that you had invested in it for in the first place. And then of course the last stage is either you're going to close it because it's kind of run its course, especially with natural resources, or you sell down or divest of it in its entirety. So there's a life cycle to everything. And before we put together that idea set in box 1, I'll turn to the bullets here. Just you need to keep in mind that the tribe has, and I think I mentioned it before, a number of advantages that are unique to Indian country, and that allows you to create something at a lower risk. And so the bullet 2 there kind of touches on that. Grants to evaluate resources. So it's an end-to-end kind of cradle to grave set of advantages where you have grants to evaluate resources and de-risk the prospect. Grants for capital development, the aggregate company that I mentioned on the prior slide, they're in the midst of using a capital grant to buy a wash plant so they can generate some sand for the contract that they won. So capital grant, and then the next step in working with them has to do with securing low-cost debt. Then, of course, the operations, if it's a own and operate situation, there's tax-free operations. So there's no taxation going to the federal government. A lot of times that's true with the state as well, and the county. And then there's government contracts. I mentioned they won a government contract with the city of LA, and so there's sometimes there are non-competitive contracts that they can secure from an 8A standpoint, and we can go through all those things with you. But the point is, there's an end-to-end set of advantages that you should take into consideration first before you then start populating a portfolio that of companies that live through a life cycle. Now, an important point with respect to the life cycle is that the risk associated with a particular venture changes as it moves through the cycle. Obviously, bucket number one is the most risky. Number two is less risky, and so forth. So you don't have to start from scratch. We help you think through that, see what the competition is. Maybe it's worth buying. In some cases, that's a utility, that type of thing. And so if you were to purchase the utility, good cash flow already, it's much easier to get a bank loan, and that's sort of a quadrant 3 there, where rather than building from scratch, you buy something that's pre-existing. And I think I mentioned before, in some cases, there are expired leases that we can support. You can just come in, pick up operations, clean up the mess, add a few components here and there, and get it rolling again, and take advantage of all those advantages that are listed above. So couple options there for tribes that are somewhat different than what's typical. Next slide. Last tool is what I've showed you prior. It has to do with that efficient frontier. It's essentially risk-adjusted rates of return. And so the key takeaway here is that I didn't mention prior is that depending on the stage that you're in, it directly affects the financing that you're seeking, which is essentially listed down there at the bottom of the slide in yellow. New ventures, very high risk, have a certain type of capital associated with it, and so on and so forth. Next slide gives you a breakdown of what that looks like. Just a summary of the various sources of capital. Kind of running out of time here. What I wanted to touch on mostly is that sources of cash right now in Indian country, a lot of it has to do with the equity that's coming from the tribe itself. There's a direct funding coming from a number of bills that have been passed that is supporting what's essentially missing down below. You can see the shaded typical provider of capital in most instances for the high risk stuff is private equity, and it essentially doesn't exist in Indian country, in large part because there's a lack of understanding of the economic advantages that are associated with any entity that a tribe can put together. So but the main sources right now are direct funding from government agencies, philanthropy, and grants. We're working hard to make sure that we can kind of coordinate some of that interagency grant funding right now. A lot of those agencies put up a list of grants, but really it's how do you make use of it, and a lot of that use will come from a coordinated portfolio. So down below, government support. I would encourage you to give us a call, technical advisory. We can help you think through all those things so that there's a much easier chance of getting some financing. Next slide. I'm going to go ahead and pass on that one, Payton. We touched on that, but the idea was that our grants are very specific to that portfolio that we've created. They're strategic in nature and allow us to sort of be more focused on moving a project forward. Next slide. This just is an illustration of how the typical industry works. And in this sector, venture capital, like I said, doesn't exist. There's a little bit formed, but really it's not enough to even begin to touch on closing the need for capital that's on the order of billions. It's just not there. And So we help bridge that as a consultancy, if you will, to the tribes. We're at no cost. I know there's plenty of advisories that or consultancies out there that do this similar work, but we don't cost anything. So Payton mentioned 75 professionals ready to help make this happen. But the difficulty I just wanted to point out on this slide is that we tend to take tribal entrepreneurs, a new venture, and try to walk it all the way to immediately getting a bank loan. And that's just not a typical process. Getting a bank loan generally requires, if you were to use average metrics, something on the order of 5 to 10 million in revenue and assets. And so it's a challenge, but there are ways around it, and we can help you think that through. Next slide. So the good news is that all those advantages are actually helping create a venture capital sector. That's, times are good for that. The recent rulings that were promulgated with the SEC allow tribes to participate in that sector for financing, and so there's good momentum that's brewing. And as we work together and communicate the value chain here, I'm confident that we're within a window where a lot of those funds will be created. Next slide. So just to finish up here, what are the benefits of a well-designed portfolio? Something that we can help with. Well, number one is just clear strategic direction. What and when, and of course, as we do that, the second bullet there, we can specifically design it such that we are capturing all those advantages for any given project. That allows us to have increased access to capital, and of course, it allows tribes to generate jobs and income more quickly over time. Thank you for listening. Trying to leave a few minutes for questions. Back to you, Payton.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And then at the end of our presentation here, we have our contact information for you guys. And we also have a number of other presentations that we're giving. One coming up tomorrow on electric vehicles, tribal electric utility formation, and then Jeff talked a lot about aggregate. So we have our solid minerals group presenting on turning piles of rocks into piles of money. So please come and attend our other presentations. I know we have about 6 minutes left. Jenny or Mary, do you see any questions?
No questions right now.
I don't see any either. We do have one in chat. Oh, no, it's just someone saying thank you.
Will the
And will
presentation? Go
yeah,
ahead.
be emailed. I was wondering on that, we can send out an email of the presentation. Are you talking about the slide deck, or are you talking about the recording for the presentation?
Both, it looks like.